But this, everyone doesn't know, this is the editorial that Phil Boffey wrote in 1879, advocating the clubbing of baby seals because it was better than starving them to death. So greatly vindicated by Jack Healy's story of March 12, 2015, about the 1,450 baby seals that had washed up starving to death in the California coast.
Baby seals or harp seals?
8-month-old pups. They were pups. And in keeping with the awesome power of the editorial page of the New York Times, they were all rescued and nursed back to health and given a good life. I want to thank you for, when I came up here in 2003 to be Gail's deputy, Phil was unbelievably generous with his advice, which included the difference between the first editorial and the second editorial is which one comes first. The difference between an observer and an editorial is nothing at all. Advice that I have lived by. No, seriously, you were. And you're starting this new chapter, and I'm very excited for you. We have fewer straight papers lying around the office, but we will miss you. And you've been a real presence at our meetings. Lots of great ideas for other people to write. Less so. Anyway, really, thank you for welcoming me and helping me, because what I knew about editorials when I first came up here, you could have packed into a thimble instead of a little left over for the Atlantic Ocean, right? And I learned a lot.
Now it fills the shot glass.
Thank you so much.
Phil, I think life brings the strangest things. I never in my life imagined that I would become Phil's editor. This is the strangest thing that has ever happened to me. Because Phil was my first editor when I arrived in '97, a year in which I cannot remember anything, along with Bob Semple. And Phil was generous and a rigorous thinker. And if you don't like the way I edit, or I always say that, and if Phil doesn't like the way I edit, well, he created the monster. Because I imprinted myself on Phil and took his management style. Exactly. Tried to soften the edges a little bit.
It's not true, they weren't hard edges.
And Phil would walk around the old building on the 10th floor and go around around 4 o'clock and just kind of walk the aisles like he was on a submarine and look for that copy and yell at you, sort of, if you didn't have the copy. So anyway, taught me a tremendous amount and remains just the consummate, like,
do you yell at anybody?
well, I try not to totally imprint. It's a little bit of imprinting. And anyway, the consummate journalist never has an error, just will track everything down to a point of like hair splitting, but that's what we do.
She does mention that quite often.
Where Phil pulls up the chair next to it, and I feel like you're my co-pilot. Work through the smallest things. Anyway, it's been an honor and privilege to work with you, and I really will miss you tremendously, and I think all of us will.
Oh, thank you.
So, anyway.
Toastmaster something? No, I believe you are.
I don't know.
What's yours?
Yes.
You are.
This is not a speech.
Prepared if you
It seems to be many pages, though.
This is a tirade. It's 3 or 4 of, I left all what I was going to say on my dining room table earlier today because we played hooky, my wife and I, this afternoon and went to see Hamilton. And I was so worried about missing the first act that I left everything. So anyway, this is a kind of hastily put together at the last moment, and it consists mainly of Eleanor's editorials on reforming Albany. 17 years worth, which I'll get to in just a moment. But I'm really, I feel a deep sense of loss with these two people. I'm serious. In all seriousness, they have sort of been my wingmen or wing persons, generationally speaking. Eleanor is the youngest of the three of us. but Phil and I are hurtling at warp speed to a rather dramatic birthday, which he will hit earlier than I will. Well, you can tell the difference, can't you, right now? But, you know, these were people of my generation, born in the late Depression, World War II, and I mentioned things like DC-3, they understood what I was talking about. Rotary telephone, right away they got it. Bing Crosby, the whole 9 yards. And now they're going, and this puts an enormous burden on one Francis S. Klein.
And timeless.
Who is the only last remaining person I can share my ineptitude with the digital age with. Hey, so Frank, you're going to help me out.
I'll be there.
We'll help each other. Okay. All right. Now that's the Boffey here. Is the publisher still here?
Yeah.
Well, I tell this story with some trepidation.
Yeah, bring it on.
And in the hope that we can invent right here a statute of limitations on past bad behavior. As Terry pointed out, there is a really sweet side to Phil Boffey. But there are others who might say that during his heyday, he was Howell Raines' hitman. And if he wasn't the hitman in getting editorials, he was kind of exercising a certain moral governance that encompassed the whole floor. And as it turned out, while Howell was still bureau chief in the 1990s, Mr. Sulzberger decreed that there would be no further smoking in offices. I, at the time, was a rather heavy smoker, to put it mildly. You could smoke at that time, before it was banned from the building altogether, in a smoking room about 4 floors below our floor that was full of some of the most unhealthy people you could see. And nobody that I wanted to hang out with. Furthermore, I had a lot of trouble writing one coherent sentence without fire burning something in my lap. Sometimes 2 at once. So I figured I somehow had to skirt the regulations. Boffey was in charge of enforcing them out. One day I was smoking, and I saw Boffey go by my window. We had windows in the doors in the old office buildings, you remember. And I said, oh my God, he's going to turn around and come back. So I come on this Boffey, and I hurled it into the wastebasket. The next moment, Boffey comes in, like that, and he says, you know, after the publisher's ukase, smoking could be a firing offense. And I said, have a seat, Phil. What makes you think I was smoking? And he says, your wastebasket's on fire. And indeed it was. So we put it out, and he never reported me, ratted me out. And as a result, because of Phil Boffey, I'm here today. Now, much was made of Phil's famous editorial on baby seals. And you remember, the essence of that editorial was really that we had invented a new club to hit them with that Bobby thought was really cutting edge, and as long as we had this advanced lethal weapon, it was okay. So go right ahead. But anyway, there is another editorial that really sits in my mind and always will, and I want to read you a couple of paragraphs of it because it says an awful lot about this guy. And it was written in I think, before Raines came aboard, in the Jack Rosenthal administration. Phil was a deputy. And at that time, and in fact on in the Raines, we ritualistically produced holiday editorials. Later in the day, they were mostly written by Berlin Klinkenborg, but under Jack, we all had responsibility for taking a holiday. And I would invariably take a really dull one, like Labor Day or something, and write some wonky thing that nobody would read. One year, Boffey volunteered to write the Valentine's Day editorial. February 14th, 1991, I wrote a double thing. Just a couple of paragraphs at the end, the beginning, a couple at the end. The first Valentine he ever sent her was the best, they both agreed. It was no store-bought greeting, but a carefully composed poem that caught the fervor of his longing, her dark beauty and entrancing traits, the intensity and laughter of their times together. It was all in slightly sophomoric rhythms, to be sure, but unwittingly he had found the secret of the perfect Valentine. Intensely personal, relentlessly complimentary, and speckled with illusions only he and she could understand. Better still, its timing had been perfect. He had mailed it from New York, where he lived and worked, to her home in Washington, D.C. It arrived the very day his chief rival was taking the lady out to dinner, and it blew the rival's evening into irrelevance. Without that first powerful Valentine, the New Yorker often thought they might not be married today. They were married, and in time, Mr. Bill kept writing these Valentines, but much to his dismay, he found he was writing more, not as well as he did before, because he was writing against the mythic lyricism of the first perfect poem. All right, fast forward to the last two paragraphs. Last week, they're now married. His lady, as fresh, beautiful, and mischievous as the day he met her, reported that a women's magazine had dissected men from various professions. Journalists, the magazine alleged, were notorious for insisting that the only authentic dining experience was in cheap ethnic restaurants. But journalists did have one virtue. They wrote superb poems to their ladies. The pressure was now becoming intolerable. He would be writing against an even more impossible step, the poetic heroics of his entire profession. Clearly, it was time to give up the struggle and look for a new art form. Possibly a billboard about Times Square proclaiming his love for all to see, or a classified ad in the personal column, or maybe an editorial.
It's amazing how an editorial like that.
Oh, it's him! He wrote the poem.
It's amazing how an editorial, the attention an editorial like that attracted. Washington Post did a follow-up analysis of it and quoted women in all sorts, Time Inc. and other places saying, "Wow, what a wonderful editorial! This is the way life should be." Blah blah blah. And then I've lost the train of thought.
Then what?
It'll float back.
Bob and I have this again. So the gist of it is that what attracted enormous attention then seems trivial today. I mean, read the Modern Love column, and the last one I read had a young male colleague of a woman sucking her toes in the back seat of a cab, making such noise, slurping noise, that the cabbie turned around and said, "What the hell is going on in my cab?" It's a wholly different era.
I'll tell you, one of my oldest friends, a woman who loves his guy, came up to me and said, "That was just a beautiful editorial, Bob. Did you write it?" And I said, "Oh, some moonstruck guy from Harvard."
Drink in celebration of the two best people on the floor, and we are going to miss you so much. And all that I can say in conclusion, besides the fact that Boffey, I never could have gotten through being editor without you in there at the beginning, and Eleanor, I never could have gotten through life without you being there. God has a special place for people who write about the state legislation and affordable care. Everybody needs you. Marina, silver.
The other two are
Huh? They cut the cake?
Yes.
Cut the cake.
Cut the cake.
Cut the cake. Or club the cake. Is
Club the So perfect.
And of course.
And of course,
Hey, you got a big plug.
I did.
Wow, very nice. You're a star.
I thought I was the only one alive who still remembered that.
I remember it.